Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. As always, let's begin with the headlines. Vietnam tries damage control after deadly anti-Chinese riots in Songtang Industrial Park. A temporary peace returns to the south of the country. China warns Vietnam over deadly protests. Death toll in Turkey's mining disaster stands at 300. Around 15 miners still feared trapped in the mine. Protesters and police clash amid mounting questions in mine fire. United States and France warned Russia of new sanctions over Ukraine. Warning comes after United Nations sounded the alarm on deteriorating human rights in eastern Ukraine. And Michael Jackson's music video for the first single from his posthumous album released. A video released by Epic Records in partnership with Jackson's estate on Wednesday. Song features singer Justin Timberlake, who appears in the video along with archival footage of the King of Pop. First up in the program, a temporary peace returned to Songtang Industrial Park, one of the most damaged areas in southern Vietnam. This after several factories suspended activities following violent protests in the country's industrial hub. Thousands of people attacked businesses and factories in Vietnam's industrial parks earlier in the week, targeting Chinese workers and Chinese-owned businesses after Beijing allegedly parked an oil rig in a part of the South China Sea. Many Taiwanese-owned firms bore the brunt because the crowds believed they were owned by mainland Chinese. Many facilities were burnt down, leaving blackened warehouses, smashed windows and overturned burnt vehicles. Witnesses said that the violence seemed coordinated with men on motorbikes, scoping out targets, then calling in the mob by mobile phone. Well, the Vietnamese government has said one person was killed in the rioting on Tuesday and Wednesday night, but a doctor at a hospital near one of the areas of the clashes said that he had seen 21 dead bodies and that at least 100 people were wounded. An eyewitness to the fighting between Chinese and Vietnamese workers in an industrial zone in the same area said that she had seen at least 13 bodies. Let's now listen in to what one of the eyewitnesses had to say.
Tôi cảm nhận thấy là cái người trực tiếp tham gia đập phá hủy các công ty đó thì họ không phải là công nhân, và những người công nhân thực sự có lẽ đang ở trong số đông đó và đang gieo hò chứ không tham gia trực tiếp vào cái hành động phá hủy.
所以我们希望美方作为有重要影响的大国，应该为推动和促进亚洲地区国家的互信与和平发挥建设性的作用。我们希望美方呢，还是应该明事理，辨清是非，多做一些负责任的事情，多说一些负责任的话。
Well, and joining me in the studio right now, of course, is Mr TCA Rangachari, who's been a former ambassador. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the show. Of course, there has been a lot of turmoil in Vietnam over the past week. This because China has moved an oil rig into disputed waters that both Vietnam and Chinese are claiming. Of course, hundreds of factories were burnt in Vietnam. Chinese-owned and Taiwanese-owned factories in Vietnam were burned, of course. How is this really going to affect Vietnam in the coming days?
Well, first of all, when you use the word disputed, well, there are disputes in regard to sovereignty issues in South China Seas. In this particular area where the rig has been moved, that, according to the experts, actually falls within the Vietnamese economic zone. And while the Chinese claim that area as part of several different propositions that they have put forward, including what is called a 9-dash line, which covers virtually all of the islands which are claimed by Vietnam, Philippines, even small little Brunei, and so on. This particular area is a place which doesn't have any land features nearby, and you probably have to extend it as one of the islands, part of the Paracels. If you extend the economic zone that the Chinese claim from that island, possibly this could fall in that area. Secondly, again, going by what those who are in the know insofar as oil industry is concerned and offshore drilling is concerned, this is not an area which is very rich in commercial terms. So, one of the objectives, apparently, the Chinese have is in order to assert their sovereignty over this area. 3, if there are different interpretations in regard to whether or not it falls within the economic zone that the Chinese claim and the economic zone that Vietnam claims. If there is a conflict there, then in terms of the law of the sea treaty, the two countries need to get into consultation with each other. And one of the underlying principles of negotiating under the law of the seas treaty is that neither side would do anything to alter the status quo through military means or use or coercion of force, etc., and so on. That you would make a good faith effort to try and negotiate your way into an agreement. Once you get into this, then it contradicts the Chinese official position, which is that in fact there is no dispute.
The Philippines,
this is all the territory.
The Philippines have taken China to court in the past, but China has taken a very hardline approach, saying that they are not going to listen to any world court because they say we are not going to listen to them. It's as simple as that. So how do you solve this problem?
You have to go one step back. The reason why the Chinese are saying that is that there is no dispute. All of this land indisputably belongs to China.
Yes.
Now, if you take that position, then it leaves no room at all for any kind of negotiations.
Negotiations, indeed.
3 or 4 days ago, there was a statement which was put out by the ASEAN. And in there they said that, the Chinese should be mindful and they should also follow the declaration that ASEAN and China had agreed upon in regard to the code of conduct in the South China Seas. And the Chinese to that have responded by saying this is not a dispute between China and ASEAN. This is something which concerns China and Chinese territory, which is being disputed by some other countries, members of ASEAN, but not by ASEAN as a whole, which is factually correct but doesn't take you any further because everybody knows that a new development has taken place. And again, this economic zone that the Vietnamese have announced is not something new. It was done about 3 years ago. And last year, when Li Keqiang visited Vietnam, the general impression since then over the last 6 months or so has been that relations between Vietnam and China were improving, that while there is a difference of opinion in the South China Seas, that this would not come to a pass where, as has happened in this case, the Chinese would end up sending a very large flotilla, apparently something like 80 boats.
Yes.
Out of which some half a dozen boats were military boats, in order to protect the oil rig. And in order to, as it turned out, when the Vietnamese sent out their boats, even to fire water cannons at them and to hit against the Vietnamese boats, causing injuries, etc. So, this is a new development. This is a worrisome development. And this goes contrary to all that has been said since 2010, when the ASEAN summit was held in Hanoi, at which time all the countries who participated agreed that freedom of navigation on the seas should be maintained, that whatever differences there may be in South China Seas should be resolved peacefully through negotiations and so on. And then there is one other aspect, that is that there are precedents elsewhere where there have been offshore drilling. And there has been, so far as resources below the sea are concerned, whether it is oil or natural gas or whatever, the extraction has taken place, and the countries who have a stake and who claim that area, for example, North Sea, there are multiple beneficiaries of the North Sea oil. Now, in this particular case, according to the figures that are publicly available, there is something like 11 billion barrels of oil in the South China Seas and something like 190 trillion cubic feet of gas. It's enormous.
It is.
And one estimate that I saw says that Chinese say that about 1/3 of China's resources, oil and natural gas, lies in South China Seas.
Okay.
Now, even if it is such a large quantum, as the Chinese say it is, it should be possible to work out an arrangement where, without perhaps going into the question of sovereignty, perhaps finishing the question of sovereignty, you could still extract natural resources to the benefit of all the countries who are involved in saying that South China Sea resources belong to them.
Okay. Very quickly, because we're completely running out of time. What do you think is India's role going to be in all of this? Should India get involved? Can India get involved?
Well, I think India is today in much the same position as many of the neighboring countries of ASEAN are. Australia, for example, Indonesia, Singapore, these are all, of course, ASEAN countries, but still neighbors of Vietnam. I think we are all in the same position. On the one hand, we all want to protect the freedom of navigation in the South China Seas. We want to ensure that the principle that any dispute that there may be should be resolved through peaceful means and not through use of military force, etc. At the same time, we may or may not have the capability, the military capability, to get involved on one side or other side.
Indeed.
To in any effective manner.
Okay.
So that is something which I think individual governments will have to think about. Certainly India will have to think about it. But insofar as the principles are concerned, I see no difficulty at all why India should not speak out as it has done in favor of these principles.
Okay, all right. Mr. Rangachari, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your perspectives there and insights on this particular matter. In fact, we'll have to slip into a very short break now. But on the other side, tragedy struck Turkey on Tuesday when an explosion and fire in a mine killed hundreds of miners. The miners and mourners have now scorned the government. We'll tell you all about this and much more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the death toll in Turkey's mining disaster rose further as more workers were found. 15 bodies have now been pulled out since Friday, taking the toll to 300. Officials from the mine held a tense news conference on Friday, giving their most detailed account so far of what had happened. An unexplained buildup of heat was thought to have led part of the mine to collapse, fanning a blaze which spread rapidly more than 2 kilometers below the surface. Turkey has experienced a decade of rapid economic growth under Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan, but worker safety standards have failed to keep pace, leaving it with one of the world's worst industrial accident records. Energy Minister Tanir Yildiz said a team of inspectors and prosecutors had entered parts of the mine which were safely accessible to begin an investigation. Let's now listen to what the Energy Minister of Turkey had to say about the issue.
Tehlikeli ve risk teşkil etmeyen bölümlerine ve işçi kurtarma ve arama faaliyetlerinin bulunmadığı bölümlere savcılığımız ve bilirkişi ocağa girmiştir. Bunun içerisinde 3 iş müfettişi, 4 bilirkişi.
Moving on now, the United States and France have warned Russia of new sanctions if Moscow keeps up its provocative and destabilizing behavior in Ukraine just over a week before the ex-Soviet republic is due to hold a presidential election. The warning came as the United Nations sounded the alarm on deteriorating human rights in eastern Ukraine, citing a litany of abuses which it said was carried out by pro-Russian separatists. In a veiled reference to Russia, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, called on those with influence on the armed groups in the East to do their utmost to rein in these men who seem to be bent on tearing the country apart. In a phone call, US President Barack Obama and his French counterpart, François Hollande, underscored that Russia will face significant additional costs if it continues its provocative and destabilizing behavior. Obama has already drafted an executive order for sanctions across key sectors in Russia, such as banking, energy, defense and mining. With the May 25th election fast approaching, Kiev's interim leaders are struggling to keep the country from disintegrating further after Moscow's disputed annexation of Crimea in March. Government forces are finding it an uphill battle to crush the bloody rebellion in Ukraine's industrial belt, where insurgents have seized over a dozen towns and cities in just a few weeks. Let's now listen in to what the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Ivan Simonich, had to say.
Human Rights Monitoring Mission has received information that about 250 people have been killed, including local residents, national security forces, and armed groups. Any further arming of protesters and their transformation into paramilitary groups must immediately stop. Armed groups should be urgently disarmed.
Well, let's now bring you up to date with the other international news in our special segment, Globe Watch. The Independent Election Commission of Afghanistan announced the final results of the 2014 presidential election on Thursday, making minor adjustments to its earlier estimates and calling for a runoff between the two top vote-getters to determine the country's next president. The commission set the runoff date for June 14th, setting the stage for a new cycle of intense campaigning. The commission said that the front-runner Abdullah won 45% of the votes and that the second highest recipient of votes was Ashraf Ghani with 31.6%. The third-ranking candidate was Zalmay Rasool with 11.4%. Rasool announced that he would support Abdullah's candidacy in the second round. Thailand's election commission said that it was no longer possible to hold elections on July 20th because of continued political turmoil, while the country's powerful army warned that it may need to deploy troops if violence escalates. The unrest presents difficulties and timing isn't sufficient to prepare for the planned July 20th vote, Puchong Nutrawong, Secretary General of the Election Commission, said on Thursday after a brief meeting with Acting Prime Minister. The meeting was cancelled after anti-government protesters entered the Air Force compound, forcing the Thai Prime Minister to flee and abruptly end the meeting. The defense chief of Laos was killed in an air crash on Saturday. A Laos Air Force plane carrying about 20 people, including Defense Minister Dongche Phichit and other senior officials, crashed. The plane took off from the capital early in the morning and crashed in Xinghong, about 470 kilometers away. They were heading to an official ceremony for the Ministry of Defense. Phichit was also the Deputy Prime Minister of the nation. The search for missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 hit a fresh snag after it was found the underwater drone at the heart of the operation had been damaged, forcing what could be another lengthy delay. The Australian agency coordinating the search effort, now in its third month, said communications equipment on the sophisticated Bluefin 21 drone was damaged on its first day back after almost 2 weeks away for maintenance and resupply. American drones were scouring a region the size of West Virginia and North Nigeria for nearly 300 Christian schoolgirls kidnapped a month ago by maniacal Islamic warlord, but the effort faced a potential roadblock in a rarely invoked US law that bars the military from helping certain governments. The US effort comes as pressure mounts for military action to hunt down the jihadist terror group Boko Haram and its leader Abu Bakr Shekau. They are accused of snatching more than 300 girls who Shekau vowed in a chilling video to sell into slavery. Around 50 of them later escaped, but the group is believed to be holding at least 276. Let's now bring you up to date with all the action from the world of sports in our Sports Wrap. Arsenal is reportedly set to renew its interest for Real Madrid striker Karim Benzema following the Champions League final after speculations that the French international could be allowed to leave Carlo Ancelotti's squad this off-season. Arsenal boss Arsene Wenger has reportedly failed with several previous attempts to purchase Benzema, but the manager still regards the striker as an ideal signing should he become available. Benzema has a year left on his contract at Real, but it would be for the Champions League finalists to decide whether they renew their striker's deal or sell him in the transfer window, which would fetch them a transfer amount of £30 million. Former Manchester United midfielder Park Ji-sung, who won 4 league titles at the club since his signing from PSV Eindhoven in 2005, has announced his retirement from football at the age of 33. The South Korean, who was signed by Alex Ferguson, said that knee issues meant that he could no longer play at the highest level. Park, the first Asian player to play in a Champions League final, said that he is leaving the sport with no regrets. Injured Barcelona keeper Victor Valdez said goodbye to his club and fans, bemoaning a cruel year. But he still found time to offer his thanks to key figures in his career, including Pep Guardiola and the late Tito Vilanova, while making no mention of under-pressure coach Gerardo Martino. Valdez, who was sidelined for 7 months after surgery for a knee injury in March and had already announced plans to leave at the end of the season, wrote an open farewell letter sealing his departure. Unfortunately, I could not say goodbye playing football as I would have liked, the 32-year-old Spain international said in the letter, which was published online on the Barcelona site. The Pakistan Cricket Board announced that the Pakistani cricketers who are on a central contract will get a 25% hike in their salary and a 35% rise in match fees this year. The hike would reportedly be backdated to January when the players' contracts had been up for renewal. The PCB said in a statement that it is pleased to announce the revision in the national team players' central contracts, which would now see players getting a pay rise of 25% in their monthly retainers in all the categories. The new salary structure, which is effective from January 1st, 2014, takes a top category contract to around $4,500 a month, Category B contracts to $3,150 a month and Category C contracts to $1,800 a month. A criminal case has been opened in Portugal against Brazil's football coach Luis Felipe Scolari weeks before Brazil hosts the World Cup. He has been named as a formal suspect in a tax fraud investigation, but he has not been arrested or charged. 65-year-old Scolari was Portugal's head coach from 2003 to 2008. The case is thought to be linked to his time there. In a statement, the Brazilian said that he had always declared his earnings in all the countries he worked in. The Attorney General's office in Portugal confirmed the investigation, which is being carried out by the Central Department of Criminal Investigations and Prosecutions. Well, the music video for the first single from Michael Jackson's posthumous album was released on Wednesday. The video was released by Epic Records in partnership with Jackson's estate. The song features singer Justin Timberlake, who appears in the video along with archival footage of Jackson. I'm going to leave you with this video. Enjoy, but do remember to tune in to World Panorama same time, same place next week. Until then, goodbye.